Good afternoon. My name is Brian Kirsch, and today I wanted to talk to you about getting your home lab set up, and specifically with the eval experience software that comes in the VMUG Advantage upgraded membership. So, my lab environment that you see on the screen here right now, I am running my home lab, in a nested environment. So I actually use VMware Workstation to nest key products from VMware such as ESXi, Verni, NSX, vSAN, all within a self-contained application, which is VMware Workstation, which you can either run on Windows, Linux, or Apple. Now, a lot of people do home labs this way. A lot of people do home labs on hardware. The reason that I'm going through VMware Workstation was I simply didn't have access to the hardware, older decommissioned hardware, and I really didn't have space for it. Now, back in the early days, I did do hardware based home labs, but as the environments kind of grew, I simply outgrew the space I had. And moving over to VMware Workstation was a little bit of a change, but I want to share with you some of the things you can do with it that you might not realize are possible. Now, one of the things that you can do is you can actually run ESXi nested, meaning you can take an unmodified ESXi install, and you can take a unmodified ESXi install and install it within your VMware Workstation environment. Now, to do this, you do need a decent CPU, which is usually a dual core hyper-threaded or quad core, and ideally a quad core hyper-threaded, just to give you enough CPU cores to make it worthwhile. Make sure you get a decent performance. And as you see this one booting up, I kind of want to talk about what you're booting up on. Now, if I take a look at another ESXi host, you'll see that it resides on a drive called F. And as I would go through my lab, they're all on a drive called F. So F is actually an SSD drive. So going to your local consumer electronics store or online, you can buy a small SSD drive anywhere from 200 to maybe 300 gig drive for easily under $100. This is one of the best purchases you can make for your home lab. Rather than kind of booting these off a spinning disk, which you're sharing with your host operating system, booting these off of SSD gives you some really great performance and allows you to kind of have a performance in a lab where you're not waiting for the hardware. Things kind of boot up automatically. Now, I've got my ESXi host up and running, and there's a couple benefits. You notice this one's got quite a bit of RAM, roughly about 12 gig of RAM. Now, this desktop that I'm running, I do have 48 gig of RAM. I did that specifically to run NSX, but if you don't quite have that much RAM, if you got 16 or 24 or 32, you have an option here in VMware Workstation where you can go into the preferences and say, allow some of your memory to be swapped. Now, doing this on a spinning disk can have some pretty serious impacts to your performance. But if you're on an SSD drive, your actual impact is fairly minor. So this allows you to kind of shore up if you're a little light on RAM with SSD. Gives you some kind of ideal, for a lab environment. Now, the other thing I kind of want to touch on here is on the left, you notice I have multiple environments. I've got one that's geared for NSX. I've got another one that's geared for a small storage type environment. One of the great things about VMware Workstation is you can have multiple environments. And because of the licensing that comes with eval experience, I have both those environments licensed. Now, I can't run them at the same time, but I can alternate. So if one day I'm working on NSX, the next day or even later that day, I could be working on, let's say, a vSAN. The licensing gives me that flexibility, and it allows me to kind of easily switch in and out, provided I simply have enough hard drive space. Now, all of this being said is great, but of course there's always a little bit of a downside. Now, being inside VMware Workstation means I'm running on a host operating system. That could be Linux, Mac, Windows, and in my case, it's Windows. Now, that means it's not always inherently stable, just simply because you're running ESXi inside an emulator, which is VMware Workstation, sitting on top of Windows or Linux or Mac. So while your performance is going to be really good and stability is actually very good, it's great stability for a home lab, not for production. You would never want to do any kind of production with this. But for that home lab, this is ideal to kind of switch things in and out, bring up new and different environments, and really get in and kind of play with things and see what you can do with it. So this video was talking about kind of getting up and going with VMware Workstation. In our next videos, we're going to be talking about getting your environments licensed, kind of getting the host connected, and maybe getting them built up. So again, my name is Brian Kirsch. Thank you for watching this video.